Welcome to another edition of Puck Talk Zoom Edition. My guest today is Maha Khan. And just a little bit of a bio for you. She played hockey for 15 years, graduated with a double major in legal studies and communication and digital media, wrote her honors thesis about diversity in sports media, works for MLSE, the Oshawa Generals, and the NHL Players Association. Maha, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Jack. I'm really excited. My first podcast in like a year. So I'm a little out of the game, but
well, I don't know why you chose to come on this one then, if you've been out of the game for a while, but
wanted to help some of my friends south of the border. Do some charity work, right?
Yeah. Maha, let's just get right into it because we are in the similar situation in that the teams that we cover have been knocked out of the playoffs. And I can't help but draw a lot of similarities between the Nashville Predators and the Toronto Maple Leafs. But let's talk about the Leafs first for a little bit. So Mitch Marner, obviously struggled quite a bit in the qualifying round.
Yeah.
Many are asking, well, why did he struggle? What did you see? What was your impression of Mitch Marner in the qualifying round?
I want to preface this by saying, I think Mitch Marner is a fantastic hockey player, but yes, he did struggle quite a bit in the qualifying round. I don't know where to place my anger with him. It was 5 games after not playing hockey for months. And I guess every other player is on the same boat, but when you're paying a player almost $11 million a year, you expect them to show up, and he just didn't. And I don't know, you feel for the guy. He's very likable. He has this like childlike charisma and persona that's really likable, but I don't know. I can't really fault him for not showing up in those 5 games. I really can't. As much as I want to, I can't.
Well, I mean, what was the difference? Because he posted 67 points with Austin Matthews on his wing, and I don't understand what was the difference? What could he have done differently?
If I knew, I would have like DM'd Kyle Dubas and been like, "Hey, you need to like do this." But like, maybe he just got into his head with all this pressure. His contract again isn't my favorite. I would argue a horrible contract, and it's hard for me to be skeptical of Kyle Dubas and what he's doing because I love Kyle Dubas, but I think Mitch Marner has one of the worst contracts in the National Hockey League. And like, if we really want to shake up this Leafs roster and this Leafs core, Mitch Marner is the first guy I'd look to trade.
Well, believe me, Nashville Predators fans are not immune to horrible contract situations, but, sort of drawing off that, what do you foresee in the near future regarding the roster management of the Leafs? Because they could easily move some big pieces out and get some young talent in. So what do you see in the near future?
Well, regarding like the big 4, we have John Tavares, Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, and then William Nylander. Obviously, Austin Matthews isn't going anywhere. John Tavares isn't going anywhere. So you have William Nylander and Mitch Marner. And Mitch Marner is arguably a better player, but is Mitch Marner worth $11 million a year? What do you think?
It's hard to justify given the way that he played. And, I mean, I can relate to the guy for wanting to put the team on his back and wanting to carry the Leafs even into the playoffs this time, not even out of the first round. But, yeah, it's hard to justify $11 million given the way he played.
I agree, and I believe he is an asset to that team, but his contract's a liability, and I think if we can dump some of that cap somewhere else and maybe even get some help on D, which we desperately need, I think you can share in that sentiment being a Predators fan. But
fan,
but sure, supporter, someone who lives in Nashville.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean,
follows.
speaking of defense, I mean, Morgan Rielly, what a fantastic campaign he had in 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
And then just what happened. I'm not really sure what happened to Morgan Rielly. I don't know if there was an injury in there somewhere, but I mean,
honestly, I agree. I think he was playing through an injury, and he's not one to not do that. He has a history of playing through injuries. We saw it when Mike Babcock was the head coach. I thought he had a fantastic playoff. And when Jake Muzzin got injured, he kind of stepped up to the plate and he was there. It's just being partnered with Cody Ceci, there's only so much you can do. And that's like another thing I wanted to bring up is I really, really, really do not want Cody Ceci to be back next year. I would be very disappointed in Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan in the front office if Cody Ceci is a Toronto Maple Leaf come the season opener, whenever that may be.
Yeah, well, we don't know when that's going to be because there's going to be another uptick in COVID cases in America. But, you know, what can you expect out of a guy like Morgan Rielly? Because Morgan Rielly is a guy had a great year and then next year tapered off. Like, what is a reasonable expectation for Leafs fans to have of a guy like Morgan Rielly?
I think we can count on him to be that number one guy. Again, he's 26 years old, super young dude. And he's a quiet leader in the dressing room. And I think that's something that the Leafs need. Yes, we have John Tavares, but I think Morgan Rielly, being one of the longest tenured Toronto Maple Leafs, has that experience, has that quiet leadership, and he's really our number one guy on D. But we'll see what happens next year. I would really like for him to get a competent D partner and see what he can really do. He's gone through a smorgasbord of different partners on D. I'd like for him to sort of settle down with one that's actually competent and can play defense. That's not Cody Ceci.
What was that word? What was that word? Smorgasbord? What was that word?
Smorgasbord?
That is the ACT word of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That is a fantastic word. Well, I mean, obviously Leafs fans and Preds fans can draw a lot of parallels, and the prevailing theory here in Nashville, good old Nashville, Tennessee, is that the Predators lack youth. So is there like a theoretical end-all be-all fixes everything problem for Maple Leafs fans, as Predators fans have determined that lack of youth is for them?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that a little later, even the sort of lack of youth theme.
Okay.
Because we saw it in Toronto. There was all of this youth and all of this star power, but there wasn't this like grizzled veteran presence that sort of like kept things at bay. But to answer your question, I don't think there's one like be all end all fix to the situation. Obviously, I'd like us to be stronger on D, and that's easier said than done. There's only a finite amount of defensemen in the National Hockey League, and we do have some assets. I would really be open to the Leafs exploring again, trading Mitch Marner for some help on D, but it has to be the right fit. Mitch Marner is not an everyday talent, and he's not someone that I'd give up just for a random defenseman. And then goaltending, I feel, is also an issue. Freddie Anderson is so hit and miss. I love him. I think he's a great goaltender, but sometimes he's not reliable in those big games. He let in quite a few stinkers in the qualifying round against Columbus. And I think if the Leafs struggle on their defense, they need a goalie that can sort of like bail them out in situations. We saw it with Columbus with Jonas Korpisalo, and he was playing like a friggin' Vezina caliber goalie, and it was really irritating at times. But I really needed that from Freddie Anderson, and he just didn't show up for all those 5 games. And it sucks to say, but I think the Leafs and him are going to part ways after his contract ends.
Yeah, and You mentioned that you wanted to talk about it, so let's talk about youth. Let's talk about youth for this Nashville Predators. I don't know if you caught my interview with John Jensen. Probably not. I understand why, but Philip Tomasino is being hailed as Nashville's youth savior. He's
Messiah.
going to come in and be the forward household name that the Predators have never had. Right. So you were in Oshawa. Tell us a little bit about Thomasino. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Philip Tomasino.
He's an absolute treat to watch. Obviously, I've only seen him play in the OHL in the junior setting, but he's just such a good skater. That would be like my number one thing that I see. I'm not a scout by any means, but just seeing him skate like butter, has that speed, has that power, like just overall 11 out of 10 skater. And I think that's so important and so underrated. And he's only going to get better if he just focuses on that speed, because you see it again with guys like Mitch Marner, that playmaking ability that they can get from being a strong, quick skater is unparalleled.
And he's got this, he's apparently has this incredible shot, and he can find ways to get into those dirty areas. What is that underrated skill other than skating? Because obviously the Predators need someone who's quick and fast, but what is that minute skill that really is overlooked with Thomasino?
Honestly, I would say his playmaking ability. It's very underrated. He has a really good hockey IQ, and I hate that term because it's so ambiguous, but he sees things that a lot of other players don't see. And that's not a skill that you can necessarily teach. You're sort of inherently born with it or without it. And he has that smart hockey IQ where he can sort of see plays before they even happen. And I see that a lot in Oshawa. The first game he played against the Spitfires with the Generals, he had 5 points, 2 goals, 3 assists. Didn't know any of their systems, sort of just picked up and was able to see things and get those shots in, get those shots off, pass to teammates. 5 points in your debut with the team at however old he was at the time. I believe he was 17 or 18. Amazing. He's going to be amazing for the Predators. You should be very, very happy. He was a steal at 24. He should have went higher.
Well, I certainly hope, for the sake of Predators fans, that he's all that he's all that he's made out to be. But you said that you want to talk a little about the youth of the Predators, or lack thereof. Do you want to touch on that for a little bit?
Sure. So youth is important. Again, you don't want to rush these kids in. I don't know if Phil is going to be ready next year. I'd rather he stays in the OHL and completely dominates and works on his skating and works on that power. He is a little bit, how tall is he? I don't know off the top of my head. He's like mid-height, like 6'1". I'm not
something
sure.
Like it's something that he's not giant, but he's not Arvids.
Not tiny. Yeah. So yeah, taking some time to develop. You don't want to rush things. You don't want to get players in from either the AHL or junior that aren't ready. So I guess youth is important, but you don't want to rush things just because you promised youth. Yeah. I don't know if you agree with that, or.
I mean, I am of the mind that if the Predators Cup window hasn't closed yet, this is the last year. As much as it pains me to say that Pecorine probably won't end up in the Hall of Fame, we just have to face reality.
For sure.
And 2 years ago, I picked the Maple Leafs and the Predators to go to the Stanley Cup and play each other, because on paper, 2 years ago, those rosters were really hard to beat. If you threw those rosters in a simulated game on NHL, they would have dominated the regular season. So, what has that been like for you to watch that same sort of transition happen in Toronto, where it's like we should have been much better than we actually were.
Absolutely. This roster on paper is arguably the best Toronto Maple Leafs roster I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it was a lot easier last year when we lost Game 7 to the Boston Bruins in the first round of the playoffs again, because there was sort of a clear-cut reason, at least in my mind, as to why they lost that series, and it was coaching. So all summer on Twitter, conversations that I was having with people, I was like, hey, here is the answer. Change up coaching. Because there is no reason as to why, with this team on paper, the Leafs should have lost in the first round of the playoffs again. So when the Leafs inevitably fired Mike Babcock in November of last year, I was ecstatic. I was like, hey, I still have an amazing roster. And we have this new, fresh coach that has experience working with Kyle Dubas, and Kyle Dubas gave him that stamp of approval, and then they lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets in 5 games. And I sort of was just sitting here like, what do we do now? Where do we go from this? It's like, I wish I had the answers. I really do, but it's just this lack of consistency year after year. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure you experience it as well as a Preds fan.
Believe me, I'm hearing the verbal ticks, just like inconsistency. Fired the coach mid-year, still have a great roster, still couldn't get the job done. I dare say that Nashville is the Toronto of the Western Conference, or Toronto is the Nashville of the Eastern Conference.
Like, it's that false sense of security. They just lure you back in, and it's just like an abusive relationship. You just keep going back. But that series was a lot of fun to watch, as frustrating as it was. That Game 4 comeback, I don't know if you got a chance to watch it or heard what happened, but
I was still upset as to the way our Game 4 went, but yeah, I that was a very fun game to watch. That was the game that really Mitch Marner stood out as a problem.
And John Tavares had an excellent game. Austin Matthews, obviously. Like, these are the games you want from the players that you're paying. Like, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, and William Nylander make almost 50% of the cap. It's like 49.7% or something stupid like that. And for just Austin Matthews to show up is unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And as much as you want to make excuses for them and say we're playing in the middle of a pandemic, every other player is as well. Every other player misses their family. We're playing in Scotiabank Arena. This is our home turf. Like, we play in this barn day in and day out. We should have had a bit of an advantage. And we should have been able to beat a hot goalie with all that star power.
Let's put it this way.
I know, I'm preaching to the choir over here.
You're barking up the wrong tree.
For sure.
Like, I wish I had something new to add to that. I wish I had something else to say, but you perfectly said it. I mean, if you want a perfect comparison to what Preds fans are going through, look at Toronto. Seriously. And I want to talk a little bit about this, the top 2 lines of Toronto and Nashville, because, I mean, who else showed up for the Maple Leafs? Who else showed up other than, Matthews and Tavares? Like, who else showed up? Because I can only point to 5 players who played phenomenal in the Arizona-Nashville series, and it was Arvidsson, Philip Forsberg, Ryan Johansson, Roman Josi, and Ryan Ellis.
Yeah, and where is Mr. Matt Duchene in all of this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Again.
Was there any player from second line down that surprised you for Toronto?
I honestly really, really liked Nick Robertson. He played his first NHL game, which was like the qualifying round. And he scored his first goal, I believe, either in game 2 or 3. I don't remember off the top of my head. Small kid, I think he's like 5'8" or 5'9", but again, has that skating, has that speed, and has a wicked shot. He actually didn't play in game 5, which I was kind of upset about. Sheldon Keefe took him out for Andreas Johnson, who came back off the LTIR, which I wasn't super happy about. He kind of just wasn't making a big impact. And I thought Nick Robertson had something to prove and really would have, I feel like, been a little more visible in that game. But I am very excited to see what Nick Robertson can do. And after having a full training camp and sort of getting more lean and mean this summer, and whatever ends up happening with this whole hockey situation, whenever it'll be back for real.
Like you, I hope that it's back in the safest manner possible so that everybody can enjoy it and there's no concerns like Tuukka Rask having to leave to go be with his family. And,
which I absolutely respect.
Oh, yeah, and without a doubt. And from me to anybody who listens, if you are trashing Tuukka Rask for leaving to go be with his family, you can go ahead and stop listening, because we at Penalty Box Radio not only support it, but we encourage people to be with their families in the time of need. And
Family
he doesn't
first,
know
always.
He doesn't know anybody an explanation.
Absolutely not.
And now that we are going into the social activism part of the podcast, we have to talk about it. People of color in sports media, that's been a very, very, very touchy subject for a very long time. Now we're fine with the hiring of the first Black play-by-play commentator for the Seattle Kraken. We're starting to see more people of color get into sports media. And, you know, as a person of color, Maha, can you elaborate on some of the experiences that you've had in sports media?
Yeah, I guess I can all start off with representation in sports media and hockey media in general. Obviously, accessibility in hockey as a whole needs to be worked on. When you don't see representation, when I don't see people that look like me playing hockey, it's hard to get into it. So it's been nice to see people like Nazem Kadri, who has been exceptional throughout these playoffs, by the way, in hockey, and seeing people like Caleb Gray on TSN here in Canada, and David Amber as well on Hockey Night in Canada. Just seeing more diversity is really going to help grow the game and will lead to more diversity and diverse opinions and diverse thoughts, and just growing the game. Canada is seen as this multicultural nation, and hockey is our sport, but when we only see rich white dudes playing it, it's hard to find that relatability. And that's why I feel like the Raptors run last year, hashtag defending NBA champs, was so good for the city of Toronto, because there was so much representation and all of these different communities came together and enjoyed something. And I feel like that's something that has been missing in hockey for a very long time. And once we learn to make this game more accessible, I think that will really help grow hockey media and sports media, especially for women and women of color. Yeah,
and you know, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about what it really means to be an ally to not only women, but especially women of color in sports. So, you know, what can the sports media community do to better ensure that, you know, women of color in this profession receive the same treatment as, say, you know, a brown-haired, green-eyed white guy like myself?
Yeah, again, we need to work to make this game more accessible. And once that happens, we're going to start seeing more people reach out. And a lot of people are scared to put their foot forward and try out an unpaid internship. A lot of people can't afford it. So creating those opportunities, reaching out to different people in your network, and instead of them reaching out to you, because a lot of times there's that power imbalance, there's those senses of insecurity, there's not seeing diverse people in the media, so thinking that they don't have a shot. A lot of that plays into this whole rhetoric of not seeing diversity in media. And then this sort of over-sexualization of women in general in media. If women are into sports, they're into sports. There's no need to say women in sports are XYZ.
Well, this is a podcast. I'm not on public radio, so you can let it go.
For sure. It's just well, yeah, you don't want to, again, over fetishize women in sports media or media in general. They're just doing their jobs. They're fans just like you. So there's no need to do that, make women uncomfortable. You want to be allies. You want to be encouraging and sharing their work on your platforms and shouting them out and amplifying their voices, especially when they're talking about social justice issues, and share their experiences and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
And when you talk about accessibility, can you elaborate on what that means in terms of generating interest for hockey in different communities?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question.
Okay. So you mentioned the word accessibility, as in like people who can get to the games, people who can learn about the game. What can we do to give that accessibility to different communities? For instance, like if there's a kid up in Canada and she's like you and she looks like you and she sees you on Twitter and she sees you talking about hockey, that obviously inspires her. Well, hey, maybe I can, do that. So how can we reach different communities through that? Like, does that make sense?
Yes, you sort of answered your own question there. But yeah, just being active on Twitter, sharing different voices, maybe voices you don't necessarily agree with, but being like, hey, this is a cool follow, and having those open and honest discussions. And if you find work that you like, share it, amplify it, help grow the game in that way. I'm not sure how diverse the Preds media is. Like here in Toronto, I don't think we have one woman of color that covers the Leafs, which is unfortunate and needs to change. But
I can't speak on the Predators because I'm not sure. Because you obviously have your big names like the NHL.com correspondents and the people who work for the Predators. But there are a lot of different other media outlets. I want to say no, there are not any women of color. And I'm of the mind, yes, that needs to change, because if the NHL is going to promote hockey for everyone, then hockey actually needs to be for everyone. It can't just be for this select group of people.
For sure. And I feel a lot of the onus actually falls on players as well. We saw Matt Dumba being super courageous and being the first player to actively kneel and then raise a fist, and a few other players following. But having that support, especially, I don't want to speak for the Black community, but the Black community being at the forefront currently with all of these movements and the Black Lives Matter movement, and just having that allyship in a sport that's predominantly white can speak a lot and build that relationship and build that trust and inevitably help grow the game.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about one of the tactics that the NHL used to show their support for the Black Lives Matter movement. When Tyler Seguin went out onto the streets of Dallas and protested with the Black Lives Matter movement, the NHL propped Tyler Seguin up like he was a savior, and they interspersed the video with comments of people of color saying thank you for standing up, and I think that sent the wrong message. What do you think
Absolutely.
what did you
I
think?
completely agree. It's great that he was being an ally and he was fighting against anti-Black racism. I think that was great. But to use him as a white man in this movement that affects Black folk, I think that was totally misguided. And I understand that it's a difficult arena to work around, but just having Black folk on your staff to be like, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea, would have helped a lot in the long run. And I'm not sure how many Black folk work in the NHL or in their PR department, but again, having those diverse voices can really help you in a PR situation like this.
Yeah, and do you believe that the hockey community can eliminate these stereotypes and these stigmas about communities of color and people of color if we simply, like you said, just diversify the face of these organizations, of the media? Do you think that we can eliminate these stereotypes?
I think it's difficult to eliminate stereotypes in any sport, but to change hockey culture is going to take a lot of work, and it has to start from the ground up. And it has to start in making hockey more accessible and more affordable. And that's another issue in and of itself. But once you work to combat that inherently unjust system that really, how do I put this politically correctly? It really, it really affects folks who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. That's why a lot of Indigenous folk, especially here in Canada, just don't have the means to play more professional or competitive hockey, and Black folk, brown folk, Asian folk. And that's why you see it being predominantly white, is that barrier to accessibility. And I feel like once hockey becomes more affordable, it's not going to be an overnight thing, but having it be open to a larger pool of people will help sort of change those stereotypes, change those dynamics, change the rhetoric surrounding that game.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, one thing that I've noticed about women in sports media in general, I mean, they are, like you said, over-sexualized and over-fetishized. And I talked a little bit about this with Corey Crenshaw of the Arizona Coyotes. But, I mean, women in sports media, I feel, they have to go through a lot more than, say, you know, people like me, men who have gone through the system. So how can members of the sports media be better ally to women? And I'll extend that to women of color, other than, you know, like, okay, go ahead. Sorry. Weird way to phrase that question.
No, that's totally fine. It's just, yeah, again, women are constantly berated, asked ridiculous questions like, name XYZ player from the 1995 Stanley Cup winning. I don't know who won the cup in 1995. But, like, come on. It's ridiculous. You wouldn't ask a guy that. And who cares if a woman doesn't know a lot about hockey, but she likes watching hockey? You don't need to quiz her on it. Just enjoy it with her. Help her learn if she's open to it. You don't need to teach her if she doesn't want to learn about it. But yeah, just believe women. Treat them like you would one of your buddies who says they like hockey. You're not going to quiz him when he says he likes hockey. I actually have a funny anecdote about that. I was in Cuba in like 2016 with my younger sister, and I was wearing a Jays hat. And I guess there were a bunch of Canadians on the resort we were staying at. And this guy came up to me. He actually played in the OHL and like recognized me.
Wow.
And he was like, yeah, he was like, hey, like, nice hat. And I was like, okay, thanks. Name 5 players on the Blue Jays roster. And I went on to list the entire roster. And he was like, okay, and walked away. So, I mean, like, but even if I didn't know any player on the Blue Jays roster, like, what gives you the right to come up to me and ask me to name the entire roster or name 5 players? Like, don't be a douche. Just don't be a douche. I feel like that's just a lesson for everyone. Just don't be a douche. Be respectful.
Wow, yeah. Maybe we should change hockey is for everyone to don't be a douche.
Don't be a douche. I'm a marketing genius.
Oh my God. I think that's the funniest thing ever said on this podcast. At least on this podcast. So praise be to you. Maha, I got the cheap Zoom plan. So unfortunately, as much as I really wish we could have more of this conversation, and believe me, you're coming back, I unfortunately have to cut things off here. But
totally cool.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
I had so much fun. Thanks for having me on.
And hopefully the next time we come on, things will be a little bit better on the social side and on the Toronto and Nashville side. Hopefully things will be on the up and up. But folks, once again, thank you for tuning in to Puck Talk with Spider Jack, my guest, Maha. Thank you again. And we will be back with more content. T-minus 5 days till college, baby. And probably going to get sent home within the first month. So y'all have a safe night. Be safe out there. Have a good one.